Welcome back. All right, so in the wake of everything that's gone on in Columbus, right, Mike Babcock ends up not being the head coach for a single, even preseason game, right? He's out. A lot of discussion about players, and one thing I keep seeing is they're soft. This generation, I tell you. Well, this generation's completely different from the last generation, and I remember when my generation was coming up being told by my grandfather that my generation was soft. And so, yeah, it just seems to be the case of just that's kind of how people view the generations that come after theirs. But things have changed. Things have changed just everywhere. HR is more of a thing than it was. I remember when I came into the job market in the early '90s. HR, no, there was no HR at jobs that I worked at for the longest time. And then when HR got introduced, it was kind of a you better not report anything to HR, man. You're done. Like you report something to HR, you are out of a job. The boss will find out it was you, and you're gone. You're done. So even when things got bad, you would not report anything to HR because you knew the boss would find a way to get rid of you. The boss would find a reason to make you go. And I remember bosses watching them target workers, where I'd be like, yeah, they're targeting that guy. You made a complaint a couple weeks ago, and now they've put him on a job where they know he's going to fail, so they can turf him out of here. He's gone. And so there was a power imbalance. And what we've seen now, just in the general workforce, and now we're seeing it in sports now too, is that imbalance is not what it once was. And so what we're also seeing is that people who have those positions of power, they're getting outed more. We have all the social media we did not have 20 years ago. So the comparison between generations to me is it absolutely doesn't work because things are completely different than they were 20 years ago. And so you have a situation where when a player has a problem, they have a certain hierarchy they should be going through that is clearly broken at the NHL level. So the first thing you should be able to do if you have a problem is report it to the coach. Now, I understand in this case we're talking about the coach being the problem, but ideally you can go to the coach, but another player you're having a problem with, or maybe it's something personal that's distracting you from work, something like that, and you can talk to your coach. Coach will help you out a little bit, right? The coach should be your mentor. The coach should be the guy that you're turning to. And now in the NHL more than ever, being a player's coach is important. And having guys who understand the players and all the psychology that goes into hockey and for athletes and just in general, that's really, really important now. And it wasn't as important before. You could have a coach go out there and just, do his thing. And if somebody didn't agree with the way he was doing it, they were gone. And we saw careers affected by that. I know in the 80s, the 90s, we would see players that were just gone. And it was, well, he didn't get along with the coach. Now, the general manager should then be the next one, at least I think, that you go to. So the coach, you don't get the right answer, or maybe you have a problem with the coach, right? In this case, problem with the coach. You should be able to go to management. So I put the GM, but I've also got management here because just in general, maybe you go to the assistant general manager. Maybe there's somebody higher up that you can go to because you didn't get either your problems with the coach or you didn't get the right answer, right? And or maybe you didn't get any action. So you go to the person next one higher up. Now the problem with this, of course, is that if the coach finds out you went over their head, there's that problem, right? Where a coach could say, oh, you went over my head. And then all of a sudden, the guy's on the third, fourth line, or maybe he's a healthy scratch, because he's not seen as a team player, and he's seen as a troublemaker, and he's got an issue. He's got issues in the locker room. And in the National Hockey League, what's been said by players who get that reputation is that then other GMs, other coaches find out, and suddenly your NHL career, it's not done, but it's severely hampered going forward because you're seen as a troublemaker. You're seen as the one that asks too many questions and all of that. And I've talked about it before. At certain jobs, I was seen that way too, where I would ask questions. I'd say, well, why can't we do that? Well, he asked why we can't do that, so we're not going to have him in these meetings anymore. And it would just be something simple that I thought, well, that doesn't seem to make sense. Why are we changing that policy? And then it was, why are you causing trouble? I'm not trying to cause trouble. So I totally get how a person might feel like they can't go to somebody in charge and they feel like when they do or when they speak up that suddenly they're seen as the problem. And then there's HR. Ideally, you go to HR before the general manager, I would think, or before management. But HR is kind of this is happening right now. HR is going to be on the side of management. This is something we've talked about before. HR is kind of there to protect management, but also should be there to broker things between management and the employee, in this case, hockey players. So you go to them, and if you don't get the answers you want, that's where, as a hockey player, I think you then go to the NHLPA. Now, at any point in time, you could go to the NHLPA. So if your coach is, doing things that you're not comfortable with, if things aren't going well, you should then be able to pick up the phone, talk to somebody in the union. Of course, there's union heads on the team itself. So if you have a problem with the coach, let's just say we'll go back to Columbus because Columbus obviously is the most recent example. Let's just say Zach Werenski is the guy that you go to with all union talk. So you go to Werenski, and Werenski's like, okay. He calls up Marty Walsh. Walsh either gets back to Werenski or gets back to you, and there's an investigation that goes on from there. Ideally, that's what should happen. And really, this is something that I don't view it as whining at all. I view it as I'm not happy with the way this is going, and I feel like, I think if it's my fault, okay, but I want this looked at, so I don't see that as being a bad thing. And certainly, again, going back to my experience, I have gone to HR. I've had hour-long conversations with human resources about things at jobs that troublemaker. But anyways, and it was one of those things where I just needed to vent, and sometimes HR was there for me to vent to. But players should have this structure. So the question then comes in about why leak it to the press? And in this case, it went to a podcast host. And I don't know if the people who were leaking this information to Paul Bissonnette meant for it to get out publicly. I don't have any idea on that, or if they were just venting and just saying, I cannot believe what's going on right now in Columbus. And so for him, his choice to then go public, to me, and this is where it's conjecture on my part, absolutely. But to me, if Biz doesn't feel comfortable calling the NHLPA, and I'm sure that with who he is and the connections he has, it'd be easy for him to get Marty Walsh's phone number, that he could call Walsh and not go public and say, look, I've got these texts from these players. Something's going on in Columbus. You guys need to look at this. Now, in the past, the NHLPA has been kind of tight with NHL owners and the NHL in general. That dates back to Alan Eagleson. There's always been this kind of feeling that the union's fractured, the union's not always there for the players, and that the union heads will kind of leave you in a lurch. I remember when the NHL got its salary cap, how quickly the players kind of went nuts. And I understood why. Because at the start of that strike, it was, we will not accept a salary cap. It's not happening. And then it did. And it felt like to the players that they'd been betrayed by their own leadership. And I do think there's some of that. Now, if you're coming in as the new head of the NHLPA, you need to have the players trust you. So, I think in this case now, coming out of this, I would hope that the next time that Biz gets something leaked to him, that he would then contact the NHLPA. He doesn't have to go through coach or management of whatever team he's hearing it from. So if he hears it from Vancouver, he doesn't have to go to Vancouver management. He doesn't have to call up Patrick Alvin. But he could then call Marty Walsh and say, all right. And it's simple. You could call him and say, look, I've got this information. I've got these texts from players. And I would like to see something done about this. And if nothing's done about it, I'm going to give you a set amount of time. And then I reserve the right to go public with it because I think this situation is wrong. And it could be on any number of things. It could be any number of things that they decide we're going to talk about this. And if the NHLPA doesn't do anything, well, players have to stick up for each other. And that's been the message, right? That the podcast for players by players. So when I look at players are too sensitive, what I hear is shut up and get back to work, which was always the message at jobs I had, where if there was a complaint, it was shut up and get back to work. No. And there were times where I would say, no, I'm not doing that. I remember there was a one job that I had, the line broke and we had a switch that turned it on and off and the switch stopped working. And so it meant the entire plant ground to a halt. Boss comes in and says, stick a screwdriver in it. My response was, bleep you, you stick a screwdriver in it. And because basically to him it was just get back to work. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to call maintenance. Just, I don't know, stick a screwdriver. I'm not sticking, that's electrical. I'm not sticking, no, I'm not putting, no, forget it. And I really think that the world has changed since then. Because again, what I'm talking about, that incident was back in the 90s. The world has really changed since then. And I like to think that players, rather than being sensitive, they're just willing to talk about this. We had fights between players and coaches dating back to Scotty Bowman's days with the Montreal Canadiens and the St. Louis Blues back in the 70s, back in the 60s. And this was common, and I'm not saying you're not going to have divides between players and coaches. Those have always been there. We're always going to see that where certain coaches and certain players, it's oil and water, it's not going to work. But the coach having that ability to basically hurt the player's career, that shouldn't be a thing either. That if it's a broken relationship, fine, and then you figure a way out. If you're saying, well, the coach isn't worth the amount of hassle this is going to be, then you say it. And if you don't feel like the player is worth the hassle, then you trade, you buy out, you terminate the contract of said player, right? And so that should be the options there. Rather than it's a bad relationship, the player's going to stay there and they're going to watch as their career goes right down the drain. And again, players back in the 80s and 90s would not have had social media. They would not have had access to media anywhere near what they do now. There was no 24/7 sports like there is now. The world has completely changed. So the shut up and get back to work that would have been said to players back in the 80s and 90s doesn't work anymore. Because when a coach says this, that's when the texts start to fly. That's when the players start talking. And I get the feeling anyways, the communication between players on different teams is higher than what it was then. And if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. But it feels like if you are dealing with a negative locker room experience in San Jose, just using San Jose as an example. So there's a negative experience. David Quinn's got really bad breath. All the Sharks don't like it. That information will get out to all the other teams. That information, with the way that the league is now, with the way everything's intertwined, it'll get to all the teams. No matter what the information is, it feels like it will get around. Players talk. It's something I've said for years on this channel. And with social media, with everybody having a cell phone, with everybody recording everything all the time, it's going to get out. This information's going to be out there. It's something that I'm aware of myself as a YouTuber. Act as if there's a camera on you. Act as if you are being watched 24/7. And I try my best to do that. That, if I'm out in public, I have to be aware. Anything I say and do, while even joking around with people, I have to be careful because there could be that situation where, somebody's recording something. It's not soft or whatever. It's just, being decent to people. And so a joke I might have cracked back in the 1990s, not gonna make that joke now. So one thing I've seen too is people saying, well, coaches can't yell at players anymore. Coaches still yell. We have heard this over and over and over again. How many times have I been watching a game and it's been said, the paint was peeling off the walls in between periods. The coach really let them have it. I really don't think players care if a coach is yelling at them. Now, if a coach is yelling at them all the time, if a coach is yelling during the games, if a coach is kicking things around in the locker room and just acting crazy all the time, that's something that absolutely would come out. And it's a terrible coaching style. You have to realize that the more often that you freak out like that, the more often you're yelling and screaming, the less impact it has. The more often you're going to have players who say, here he goes again, and you're going to have them, again, they all have phones, making little jokes, and here he goes again, here we go. And so, like I remember growing up, my dad had the same speech he gave me over and over again. By about the 50th time he gave the speech, well, I'd already recited it to my mother, so my mom couldn't be in the room with me when my dad would recite the speech because she'd crack up laughing too much, which just made Dad angrier. So it's just, it's one of those odd things where it's not yelling that players are reporting coaches for. I don't know of a coach that's gotten fired for yelling or raising their voice. That's just not a thing. And social media posts, I've seen this too, like, they post everything, so who cares about their phone? The idea that if a player posts a video or pictures on the internet means they don't have a right to their privacy, to me is kind of crazy. And I know it's something that social media influencers go through as well. And professional athletes, I think, get this. Certainly, in politics and just various forms, people will say you give up your privacy the moment that you become a part of that. Once you take that on as your job, as your vocation, then you don't have the right to privacy, which is incorrect. People always have the right to privacy, no matter how public they may be in their job, no matter how public a hockey player might be, or a baseball player, or a basketball player, no matter how many reels the guy puts up on Instagram, he still has the right to privacy for the things that are on his phone, which might include bank records, might include a bunch of emails he doesn't want everybody to hear about. Like, there's a lot of reasons why somebody would be like, I'm not handing my phone over to you. I'm not telling you this information. Maybe somebody's going through a divorce and they haven't told anybody. And if you grab their phone, it's going to be really obvious from messages and things you might like. And again, I'm using these as examples, right? So coaches having this amount of control and this amount of I'm the boss, therefore, that's gone by the wayside. It really feels like now the coaches that are in place that succeed are the guys who know how to talk to the players. They know the psychology of the game a little bit better than maybe coaches did back in the 80s and 90s. And they're generally nice guys. I would mention Jim Montgomery in Boston as an example. Montgomery went through a lot when he was let go by the Dallas Stars. And he's become this incredible story now that he's got himself clean. He's got himself, he's got his life in order, and he has this great season with Boston as coach. I have never heard anything negative about him. But not only that, I never heard anything negative about him really in Dallas other than the vices that he was dealing with at the time. Nobody ever said, well, he was a jerk, he was yelling and screaming. Just he had this vice that was absolutely negatively impacting his job. And once he had that under control and he had it dealt with, he gets another job in the NHL. He's gone through his first year, and even after Boston blew it in the first round against Florida, nobody has said, well, Montgomery needs to go. It's just not a thing. So this idea that, well, once your name's out there and something's happened, you're just gone forever. That's not the case. In the case of coaches that have had a hard time with that player-coach relationship, those are the coaches that, yes, will struggle in this day and age. And I do question teams hiring coaches that they know have had negative impact on relationships with players. And just, I don't think we're going to see those coaches in the league much longer. The good news is you've got all kinds of coaches in Europe, and I will keep saying it until a coach in Europe gets hired, which is probably going to be a while. All kinds of coaches in the AHL. You've got assistants and associate coaches who want to be a coach. I'm sure you've got goalie coaches that wouldn't mind taking a shot at a head coaching job either. There are a lot of very well-qualified people in the hockey world, and this is part of the reason why when you see a coach, and in this case it was Mike Babcock, who gets another opportunity, there are people who will say, and I agree with them, there are other people who are at least as qualified, at least as good as him at coach. And when it comes to the player side of things and being able to make all this work, they're better. They have that skill. Not everybody has people skills. It's not there. And again, going back to my experience in 20 plus years, there were people I worked with who were really hard workers, terrible people skills, but really good workers. And there were also people who had great people skills, terrible workers. It is a matter of finding that mix where guys got the people skills and he's got the ability. He's got everything that you need in order to succeed. Younger players, keep in mind, when you talk about younger players, they have less leverage. They don't have the experience in the league. They don't have the reputation in the league, especially if they're 18, 19, 20 years of age. And the maturity's not there either. These are guys who are living at home within the last couple of years. They're still, figuring things out. And when you're that young and you've got a coach that's kind of coming at you and you've got this adversarial relationship, it has to be harder for the younger players. A veteran player who's made $40 million in his career can be like, you know what? To heck with you. I don't need to. But for a guy on an entry-level contract, especially if that's a player who is not a highly sought-after prospect, and if that player is somebody, think about players who are playing for contracts right now. It's not just the veterans on PTOs. You've got a bunch of young guys too coming out of these rookie camps. They don't have a contract. So if you have a coach that power trips, you have a coach that Some coaches will play favorites. You have coaches that just decide, I don't like that kid. I don't know why, I just don't like him. And you have this adversarial relationship. It's harder for the kids. It is harder for the younger players. They are not in a position where they feel comfortable complaining because they just basically they just started. It's their first year on the job as a pro in a lot of these cases, or maybe their second or third, and they still don't feel quite as comfortable as a guy who's been there for 15, 20 years. So, and again, going back to my time at work, I would see that somebody who's brand new on the job, probably not going to be willing to talk back to a supervisor, to anybody in a position of power. The guy who's been there for 20 years, he's going to be more likely to speak up. He's going to be more likely to stand up for himself. So it's a completely different scenario for a young player coming in as it is for a veteran player returning to the league. Or on even a veteran player on a new team. They know how the league works. They know what is or isn't right. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about that with all you fine people on the internet because I do feel like the relationship has completely changed. And so, yeah, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.